Episode 1 of Cosmic Motion, an audio program where we discuss motion pictures good, bad, and ugly, and always interesting throughout the cinematic cosmos. We will be talking about all kinds of elements of this film and will likely spoil some aspects. Please watch the film first and then come back and join our little party.
Especially if you care about those things.
My name's Bill. I'm a writer, director, and editor, and...
My name's Colin, and I'm a multimedia editor. Now, I know that we have talked off mic about not wanting to be a bantery pod, because frankly, that's beneath us. But I will say, if we were to get a film festival standing ovation, how many minutes do you think this podcast would get of one? What, like 10 minutes worth of standing ovation?
I'd say 10 is a good number.
Yeah.
I don't want to overestimate it. Let's go with 10 and be modest.
That feels right. That feels right.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's not speaking for all of the tops that would just come off of both men and women.
Right.
And all genders.
And bottoms as well, frankly. I mean, people can Donald Duck it out there if they want.
So, Colin, this first episode, we watched a film by the great, late character actor, Timothy Carey. What do you think about Timothy Carey? Are you a fan?
Well, so I guess I didn't realize that he was such a beloved figure in Hollywood. You know, I knew of this movie maybe through scrolling through the Criterion Collection and having seen it and thought, you know, what is this? Maybe it's something I'll get around to one day. But all I really knew about Timothy Carey was what I think most people will know of him is his character acting roles, you know, Paths of Glory, The Killing. You know, I'm pretty sure I saw him in a Cassavetes film somewhere.
Killing of a Chinese Bookie.
Or is it Minnie and...
Minnie and Moskowitz?
Moskowitz.
He might be in that as well. I haven't seen Minnie and Moskowitz, but he's definitely in Chinese Bookie, so he could be in both.
Yeah, I think I recognize him from Minnie and Moskowitz, but I guess so. What I would say about him is you definitely recognize that you have seen him when you see his face. It's definitely, I know that guy situation, but... I don't think I could have told you his name or even necessarily picked him out of a lineup before really diving into this.
Did you notice him in Paths of Glory? Did he stick out at all to you or in maybe in The Killing?
Well, certainly in both of those films. Particularly maybe it's because of the scenes, but I guess I have to assume that he's kind of stealing those scenes a little bit. In The Killing, because of the compelling nature of that scene.
Yes.
And how ugly he has to be to achieve his goal, you know, and that really stands out. And in Paths of Glory, it's just because I think he really does steal that scene. And I think that I may have heard, and this could be apocryphal, but I think I've heard stories about them deciding to kind of follow him with a live mic during other stretches of the film because they just decided that the things that he was kind of muttering under his breath were kind of worth capturing and stuff.
I would absolutely, whether it was the crew or Kubrick himself, who was a highly curious individual, obviously.
Right.
Yeah, I could totally see him recording Timothy Carey just to listen to it later because he's just a one-of-a-kind, unique, strange human. And, you know, like
now I've done a little bit of homework just for this inaugural episode here. And I did come across a few, you know, anecdotes about him kind of riffing, for 18 minutes for a take that was supposed to take one or something like that. So, and this film definitely bears that out for sure.
Yeah. There's a great story with him on Paths of Glory where he pulled a publicity stunt where he faked being kidnapped. And this is in Europe. And so he got a call. There was a call from the police to James B. Harris, Kubrick's producer. You know, we have Timothy Carey. He says he's been kidnapped. No, he's doing that. He's doing that for publicity. He wasn't kidnapped. And they eventually fired him. So he was fired, even though he's in the movie. And I read that James B. Harris said, if you notice, you don't see the men who go on trial who are going to be executed, you don't see them fighting in the trenches. And one reason was because they fired Timothy Carey. They couldn't use him in the scenes where they'd be in the trenches, so they couldn't use any of those actors in those trench scenes.
Okay. So he's an eccentric individual.
He's an eccentric. He also was considered for Reservoir Dogs, understandably did not make it, although, Lawrence Tierney was no ray of sunshine himself, so could have gone either way with either of them. Well, World's Greatest Sinner is a film that is I guess I should say, written, directed, starring, produced, and released by Timothy Carey. I want to describe him actually physically a little bit. because you were talking about his looks. I think that's important in case people, they might say, oh, that guy from Paths of Glory, or oh, that guy in The Killing. He's 6'4", jet black hair. He has, I guess, I don't want to say dull. What would be a kind word?
He's got a kind of a gloominess to his look.
Yes.
He's got kind of a big bags under his eyes. The way that I was trying to describe him to my wife, who was asking about him before we sat down to watch the movie together, I think that he's like a cross between Ron Silver, Vincent Schiavelli, and Nick Cage.
That's amazing.
Like if they fly teleported into the same being, I think that's what you would get.
Brundlepod.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's pretty good. I didn't think of Nick Cage. That's totally in there. Absolutely.
I mean, at least in this film.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's got a bit of a even kind of a mopey or lazy look to him. But
his eyelids do this thing, and so it's like, can you see anybody right now? Like they go so low over his eyeballs sometimes when he's talking, especially like I remember there's a scene where he's talking to a young girl and she's like, I'm young enough. And, this is later in the film. We'll go into this later. And he's saying, how old are you? In his Timothy Carey way. And his eyes the eyelids just go so low. It doesn't seem like he could actually see out of them, but he can apparently.
Yeah.
Very sleepy eyes. Sleepy, sleepy, sleepy.
Sleepy. And then I guess we should describe his vibe and maybe his voice because, so there's an interesting moment early in this film where he proclaims to a large gathering of people that he's not drunk. And I thought that was really instructive because
yes,
I actually got the vibe that like maybe he was showing up to set a little bit loose, like 'cause he really does have this drawl or something that makes him sound like he's maybe under the influence of.
Yeah, he definitely sounds, and maybe it's because he's a large man, like not enough blood is getting to his brain.
Yeah.
At times, he sounds, again, sleepy. He kind of, like you said, drawls or stretches words.
And listen, who among us? I mean, I'm not actually known for enunciating my words particularly well.
You enunciate just fine. I was literally about to say he does not, whatever the opposite of enunciate is, he is doing that. He is,
blathering?
Nearly slurring.
Yeah.
He's nearly slurring his words. Not quite, but it's impressive. And he has a very deep voice.
Yes.
So all of that combined bring you to the magnificence that is Tim Carey, not to be confused with Jim Carrey.
And he is a striking figure, but he's definitely a unique amalgam of parts.
100%. Middle name? Agaglia.
I'm sorry? First of all, how dare you call me that?
Bless you. No, his name is Timothy Agaglia Carey.
Wow, okay.
So again, primarily known for The Killing, Paths of Glory, this film, and maybe Beach Blanket Bingo from 1965.
Wow, sure.
So, but this guy was in a lot of he did a lot of character work. He's one of the most famous character actors, certainly one of the most eccentric character actors to ever live. Born March 11th, 1929, died May 11th, 1994, the age of 65. And Kubrick liked him for obvious reasons. He has a magnetic presence in addition to all the things we're talking about. His unique energy is very vibrant on screen. If there's one thing you need, it's presence in film. You can even not be a great actor. Many stars and other people have had careers out of just having great presence and charisma on screen.
Yeah. No, he definitely seems like he fits a pantheon of recognizable, talented character actors that probably wanted to make that big film and never got the chance. And lo and behold, he did get the chance. It just wasn't distributed. Or what is the story behind this never being shown? Because as far as my research is concerned, it sounds like maybe Turner Classic Movies revived this at some point.
Well, so Martin Scorsese is a fan. This movie, I think the most accurate way, from what I've read, to describe it is it's self-distributed. Back in the day, 1962, when this movie is coming out, that probably means pretty limited distribution. John Cassavetes did a pretty good job self-distributing some movies, but generally it wasn't done. You got some kind of distribution to this day, but he self-distributed it. He funded, produced, distributed his own movie. It opened at the Vista on Sunset.
Get right out of here.
Yeah, East Hollywood, then known as the Continental Vista.
Well, I did recently read while standing in line at the old Vista not too long ago. The Vista used to be a house of pornography.
Really?
Or some kind of or at the very least, some of the time, and then maybe kind of grindhousey or more independent stuff other times. But I'm pretty sure it wasn't always like your typical Hollywood movie palace as we think of them.
Well, I
today.
wonder if it was a palace first, and then when pornography became mainstream for 2 seconds in the 70s,
right?
Like with Deep Throat, Devil Miss Jones, Beyond the Green Door, blah, 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 all those famous ones that everybody saw apparently in the 70s. And then it came back to showing.
Yeah, no, you're probably right about that. I guess all the famous old celebrity signatures and handprints and things out front would speak to that.
Makes sense. But yeah, obviously, the Vista still around today. Well, let's talk about the cast a little bit. Please. So Tim Carey plays Clarence Hilliard, a.k.a. God Hilliard. Gil Barretto plays Alonzo, his gardener, and later his lieutenant, I think it would be an accurate way to put it.
That's right.
Betty Rowland, James Farley, who plays a character I think that can best be described as the devil, and Gail Griffin. So those are some of the top cast members. And I don't really know anybody in this. I will say that Gil Barretto in particular, I think, is a pretty darn good actor. There are some people in the film that feel like they probably never acted in anything before in their lives, but Gil Barretto he seems pretty solid.
Well, so I actually did really appreciate Gil Barretto. I thought that he kind of lends the movie, I don't know, a little bit of heart or something that's kind of feels like it's missing from Tim's performance. Can I call you Tim? I can't ask him.
Yes.
He's, yeah. So I actually did really appreciate that about old Gil.
Gil is also a Cuban refugee in Scarface, 1983.
Oh, okay, get right out.
Bam. So I don't know if he was Mexican, Cuban, but he's Hispanic of some origin.
Yeah. So now I saw it written somewhere that part of the reason that Mr. Barretto has such a lofty role is that Tim was really hard on or was not impressed with some of the day players that he hired, and a lot of their lines just ended up making it into the way of his mouth. Now, I don't know.
Oh.
And I'm trying to figure out where I saw that.
I believe it.
It does sound like Mr. Carey had a bit of a reputation for being difficult to work with.
I think that's definitely true when he was acting in other people's films, and I wouldn't doubt it as a director too. He probably. Yeah. I can only imagine what a Tim Carey set was like. I don't know what a day with Tim Carey on set would be like with him directing.
Well, and I suppose it would make sense for this because it sounds like so much of his own money was on the line. Am I wrong about that?
No, I mean, I would say that it seems, as far as I can tell, that he funded this himself. Mm-hmm. And so obviously back in the day, especially, you're paying for the film, the processing. Those are two extremely expensive items in addition to everything else that people still pay for: actors, food, props, costumes, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's probably one of the reasons why he only made a few movies himself.
I think I heard the figure 100,000 tossed out there for this.
That could be. I actually don't have a figure on that. So yeah.
Which feels like, adjusted for inflation, is like a lot of money for the time.
Yeah.
And this is what, 62?
Yep.
Okay.
Came out in 62. There's a number of interesting connections to this film. I guess we can go ahead and talk about some of the crew. There were 4 cinematographers on it.
Oh, there's one in particular I'd really like to talk about.
There are 2 in particular that I want to talk about.
Can I say one, you say the other?
Sure. I'm wondering. I think I know which one you're going to say.
Okay.
So I'll say the 2 that we probably both have no idea who these people are. Frank Grande and Robert Shelfo.
You're right. I've never heard those names before.
Who do you want to talk about?
We probably want to talk about the same guy first. I want to talk about old Ray Dennis Stegler.
R.D. Steckler, the one and only.
Oh, boy. Which I always have to look up the name of the film, or the most famous, but I'm going to try to remember it off the top of my head. Is it The Incredibly Strange Creatures That Became Mixed Up Zombies? Yeah. I feel like I'm missing something.
The Incredibly Strange Creatures Who Died and Became Mixed Up Zombies, I believe is the full title.
Going to fact check to you there. Yep. The Incredibly Strange Creatures Who Stopped Living.
And
became Mixed Up Zombies.
That's even better.
Oh, yes.
The Incredibly Strange Creatures Who Stopped Living and Became Mixed Up Zombies.
His second film.
That has a connection to what we're talking about in addition to this, because Tim Carey, acted for Kubrick. Kubrick made Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. The studio, which I believe is Warner Brothers, contacted Steckler and said, you can't use that title. We have this title that's similar. You need to change it. So apparently Steckler's title earlier was more similar to Or How I Learned to Stop Worrying, blah, 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 blah. And he changed it to what it is.
See, this is now off mic. I'm going to throw some light on our podcast for our viewers. Bill was lamenting to me that he worried that he has the capacity to ramble. But I say, you're connecting dots, Billiam.
Thanks. You're connecting dots too, Colin.
That was a lot of dot connecting that I never knew. See, this is what I need. This is what we need out of this show. This is what we're doing for the people.
Cinematographer number 4. Did you see who it is?
No.
So credited as Ove H. Sehested, real name Edgar G. Ulmer, director of Detour, most famously, a very famous film noir, very low budget, famously worked in low budget films for most of his career, and was one of the directors that was really able to milk, no money essentially to put something on screen.
Well, it's funny, when you reference there being 4 cinematographers on this film, boy, it really shows, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It also, I think what also shows on screen is that there maybe had 4 lights, if that.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Because there are scenes in like a bedroom where you're like, why are there pools of light? Like, why can't they just light the whole room?
Well, I will come clean. I'm not super familiar with all of the work of old Ray Dennis Steckler, but I will say I am pretty familiar with Incredibly Strange.
Yes.
And, probably for the same reason that most people are. I discovered it through Mystery Science Theater and then eventually went back and watched
nice.
it because, you gotta... But that's the thing. And, I actually, to go on a brief tangent, I once heard Joe Dante.
No, let's call him Dante.
I once heard
Amazing.
Joe Dante, whom I love, say that he really does not appreciate Mystery Science Theater because he feels like, obviously it's hard to make a film. You should never, your default position should never be to come out and attack something that other people may love. The thing is, though, Mystery Science Theater, for being critical and lambasting movies the way that they do, has turned me on to so much stuff. And, even though I'm not going to turn around and say that, RDS is like a paragon of talent, I will say that I actually did go back and just watch the movie without their commentary and kind of, appreciated it for what it was, and I never would have had that experience without Mystery Science. Anyway, it's just a little defense I wanted to throw out there for Mystery Science Theater.
I think it goes both ways. I think you're right, and I think that Joe Dante or Do Jante is also right, because I think for the mainstream audiences, oftentimes it gets reductive for some of these films, and frankly, a lot of the films are pretty terrible.
Sure,
okay,
sure.
Even Steckler's films, they're terrible.
Right, and if you lump a film, if you lump one film in with an Ed Wood movie, is not as bad as like Time Chasers or whatever the hell else they're doing on that show. You know what I mean? Or Manos, The Hands of Fate.
There's definitely a wide gamut of filmmakers and films, but what's great about people like Steckler is that they have a voice. I'm just going to go into Steckler here for a moment, because not only that, we're talking about independent cinema from this time, and this is also when Steckler, yes, he's shooting for other people to make money. He was a cinematographer as a trade, and then he would also shoot his own films.
And they feel very of a piece, and that's part of why I went on this tangent. Well, I'll get back to that.
We'll get back. I just want to mention a few other films in case people want to check out Steckler. I recommend Wild Guitar, Incredibly Strange Creatures, which, I don't remember how I discovered that one. I think it was from working at the video store in Chicago that I worked at called Facets Multimedia that had a lot of weird movies. And then later again, heard more about Steckler on a British show called Incredibly Strange Film Show, which is named after Steckler's movie. The Thrill Killers, which is really interesting, 1964. Ratfink Abubu. That's the correct pronunciation. Don't listen to people who tell you Ratfink and Boo Boo or like IMDb. 1966. Those I would recommend anybody who loves movies watch, because they are a unique journey.
I will also throw one other one in there, which I actually discovered through old Billy Joe Bob Briggs.
Yeah,
which is The Chopper.
The Trooper.
Oh, the Trooper. Sorry, yes.
The Trooper. Yeah.
No, but there's another name for it too. It's like the Wild something or other, which is how I discovered it.
I think the other title is Bloodshack. Is that right?
Okay, yeah, you might be right about that. It sounds right.
Yes. The Bloodshack and the Trooper. There are two different versions of the same film.
So that's why I call it the Chopper, because I always knew it as the Bloodshack, but then I've recently discovered that there's another name for it. But anyway, that's an interesting little experiment as well.
That one, and I think that Joe Bob might have said this before. I thought of it. It definitely plays like, or maybe it was somebody else, but it plays like Michelangelo Antonioni making a horror movie for like $1.50 or less. Yeah. It's just lots of slow scenes of people walking around this property. So we have those cinematographers. Definitely look up Ulmer. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you might know him already. There's, I guess we can get into the story a bit now and then continue talking about the different aspects of the filmmaking as they come up.
Do it.
Okay. So the beginning of the film, there's an opening song, and some of the lyrics are, "He's the world's greatest sinner. He's the world's greatest sinner. As a sinner, he's a winner. Honey, he's no beginner. He's rotten to the core. Daddy, you can't say no more. If you've ever sinned before, you know what I mean." Who wrote this wonderful 50s tribute?
Well, I believe that would be none other than old Franklin Zappa.
That is correct, sir. Frank Zappa, at 22 years old, did the music for this film.
And this was his first kind of major release of anything, right?
As far as I know. And not only that, he said on a show years later that it was the worst movie he'd ever seen or something to that effect.
Yeah, I think I actually may have seen that same outtake, and it sounds like that actually, and it makes me feel a little bad for old Timothy. Apparently he was quite cut by that remark.
It's pretty rough when you give a 22-year-old a chance to do music for your movie, and then he just trashes it on national television.
Sure. Well, and look, we haven't gotten into the plot yet, but I do think it's so fitting that he would use Zappa for this, but also it would be such a cutting remark because it seems like this movie is trying to be countercultural in the same ways that Zappa's music is trying to be countercultural.
That's a really good point.
And so I can see why, where Carey would be, gutted by that, because they ultimately feel like they're trying to do some of the same things, and they actually harp on a lot of the same institutions and ideas.
Yeah, and so you're right. It's actually pretty funny that would be the reaction, and I don't know if this is some weird influence that the movie had on Zappa, but in the film we'll later see Barreto, Alonzo in the movie, applies a kind of chin beard to God Hilliard, and then they cut it down to basically an upside down triangle that suspiciously looks like what Zappa wore for years.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting. Now, Zappa's was probably real, but...
And before we get into the plot, I guess maybe if I were to speculate as to why he would make remarks like that, Zappa seems like a guy, and I'm not super familiar with his oeuvre, but he does seem like a guy who walks the walk and also talks the talk in terms of, he seems like while he uses his music to do absurd things and to say countercultural things or in-your-face things, he's also clearly a talented musician.
Yes.
And I wonder if maybe he's just seeing the aesthetics of this film, and, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag right now. There's some questionable editing, lighting, shooting going on. I'm not saying that represents the film entirely, but maybe he just looked surface level at the aesthetic of this movie and said, maybe it's got something to say, but it's not a real pro, and like I am. And
absolutely,
I don't know. I'm speculating here.
No, I think that's probably a safe bet to make. That to anybody who isn't in the film industry or doesn't know how much effort it takes to light something back then, I'm talking about.
Sure.
Light something, shoot something, develop something, edit it, do all the optical printing, etc. that needs to be done. People don't realize the amount of work that was going into these things. And so when they see only the cream of the crop from Hollywood on TV or in the theater, and then they put this movie on at the Vista, I can understand why they might think this looks awful. Because, I mean, it's, like you said, the questionable lighting. I mean, when it's lit, there are scenes where you're wondering where are the lights.
Or when it's in focus.
Yeah,
or
when it's in focus, exactly.
When a cut doesn't absolutely interrupt the middle of a person's dialogue. So
yeah, no, this film has a great number of problems. Among them, some of the writing and direction. But that said, it still survives, and it's still an interesting and sometimes powerful and prescient film.
Yeah. What made you want to tackle this one first? Because obviously this internet radio program has been spinning in the brain of Mr. Boudel for some time, and we've been talking about it for a little while, and even as far back as its conception, you had this film in mind as one of your inaugural films. So what put it so far up the queue for you, I guess? So I
had fairly recently seen it on Criterion Channel, and I just found that it's a great example of, an independent vision made, independent in every way, as we've said. This guy is doing everything, and he's acting in it. And he's carrying this movie, and he's probably, a lot of the publicity that it got is probably from his own mouth when he goes to do interviews for other movies that he's in. I have a great admiration for people like Cassavetes, Orson Welles, and others who struggled with the massive feat that used to be independent production and still is independent distribution. And this is a great example of it. And whether the movie works or not, that's one of the reasons why I like people like Steckler. Steckler made terrible films, but he made films. He made a number of them. And some of them are really interesting. Most of them are not, but some of them are.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said for somebody who is basically pushing literally a boulder up a mountain.
Particularly contrasting it with the ease of making a film today, which is not to suggest that it is the easiest endeavor today.
Correct.
But as you suggest, your phone can do 90% of the work for you.
Yeah.
If Ray Dennis Steckler or if Timothy Carey had an iPhone, this would be a whole different ballgame,
Totally.
And it really is, especially this far back, it really is a feat. And, we're going to get into it, and we should probably start with the plot. But I'm occasionally an editor by trade. So
Colin is a professional editor.
And so I'm gonna throw I'll probably throw a lot of shade on the editing when we get around to it. But I have to acknowledge that there are a lot of limitations that they're probably dealing with, and I'm going to speculate on them when we get there. But there's a lot of things that we're not seeing that could lead to what this is. And if anything comes through, it's the passion for the project.
Yeah.
But anyway, so yeah, maybe let's start with how this thing unfolds.
Absolutely. And just one more thing to that. I just want to say, one of the main things I want this show to focus on, and I think Colin is interested in this as well, is the voices of the people telling these stories and how they tell them cinematically. And this is a great example of somebody doing it all on their own and having a pretty strong cinematic voice, despite the fact that it's completely unsophisticated. He still had something to say. He got it done. And I admire that. So we keep talking about that there is a plot. So let's actually talk about it. Starts with insurance salesman. His name is Clarence Hilliard. And he's living a pretty middle-class suburban life, discontented with his lot. And the very first image, though, in the film, I want to say, is of Carey colored in red, wearing sunglasses, holding a circular object. Now, we're going to come back to that. Remember that object, everybody. Listener. Then there's a narration, and it sounds like it might be God, but we're going to find out it's somebody else.
Oh, boy, are we.
And he speaks fondly of Clarence.
Now, by the way, not to already derail us, but do you recognize that voice?
I don't. Who is that? A famous voice actor or something?
Well, he is a famous voice actor, but is there a particular theme park attraction that you may recognize this voice from?
Oh man, I know nothing about theme parks. Is it Disneyland?
It is Disneyland.
Okay.
So it's a voice actor named Paul Frees, and apparently he's done quite a few different projects, but most people will probably know him best as the disembodied, ghostly voice, the narrator of the Haunted Mansion at Disneyland.
I thought you might say that.
And he has a very striking voice. It sounds very Orson Welles.
Okay.
But he's quite talented. And by the way, I'm not a Disney adult, I swear. I think they're weird. No,
There's also, I think, if I remember, this is hitting my brain, and I don't know if this is accurate. I think Paul Frees might have done a voice in, what is it? What is that? The Girl Who Knew Too Much, which is a Mario Bava film.
Okay.
If anybody's interested. I think he might have done a voice for one of the European actors. Anyway, he's probably a well-known, dubber of American voices onto European actors.
He's best known for 1979's Rankin Bass Jack Frost. Okay.
Oh.
Wow, he does a lot of Rankin and Bass. Okay. In fact, I guess that's where we would know him best. There you go. But yeah, but he's that is the narrator at the beginning of the film.
Yeah, so it's this voice, this third person omniscient narrator, and he speaks of Clarence fondly, and we go into talking about Alonzo, who is astute in the art of picking weeds. Alonzo will come back later, and I think Tim Carey, Clarence, is doing some weird things with his family. Like he has a horse for his house in the burbs. And this has to be like Burbank or something. I mean, who lives like this? I thought it was
Burbank, but apparently it's El Monte.
Yeah, according to Zappa, this was filmed in El Monte.
Good old Inland Empire.
So, but there's he has a, relatively, it's not I'd love to have a house like this, but it's not big, but they have a horse. And so they're like laughing and all riding the horse at the same time. And then Clarence goes to work and he starts telling all of his coworkers that they can go home. And right. Much to the surprise of his boss, who comes in and says, "Where the hell is everybody?"
And there's an interesting quote in there because the first thing that you hear him say is, well, you hear him on the phone. Yeah. And he says something dismissive about buying insurance. I'm not sure the exact quote is, but then, when his coworker gives him a look of what the hell, he kind of dismisses it as they didn't want insurance anyway.
he has another conversation where I think he's talking about the insurance you take out when you die for funerals.
That's right.
And he says, look. Your body's going to decompose, and you know what? Decomposing bodies smell. Your body, no, they're going to bury you.
Yeah,
don't worry about
right.
it. You don't need to pay for insurance. All right, thanks very much, ma'am. Click.
And you know what, Bill? I'd like to put that to the test one day.
Me too. Yeah. So, Clarence is not doing well at work because he's telling his coworkers to go home and nobody's manning the insurance office and getting their daily cheese. So Clarence gets fired, goes home, and he says to his wife, quote, "I want to do something different. I want to write a book and go into politics. I want to be something more than Clarence Hilliard if I can." Not only does he talk to his wife, he talks to his horse. Then he goes to his gardener. He says to his horse, "Someday people will never die." And then he talks to his gardener, Alonzo, and he says, "I have a plan that nobody else has ever had before, a plan that's going to make me a god." Now, if I was his gardener and, I might say, "Yeah, okay, well, I'll see you tomorrow," and then never come back.
He hatches a scheme fairly quickly.
Very quickly.
Doesn't take a long time for him to pull this together.
This is an efficient insurance salesman and plot. And then there's a scene with Clarence standing in the middle of a lot of black people while a blonde white guy on stage pretends to play guitar, and then black girls scream at and claw at him.
Particularly one actress who's doing probably ADR that gets used over and over and over again.
Oh, really? I didn't notice that.
No, there's one particularly piercing scream that is very present in the mix. I'll just say that.
Yeah. And so the reason to bring up, I think, race in this, it's 19, whenever they shot this, 60 or whatever.
No, it felt very progressive.
Yeah.
It did.
It feels progressive, but it also feels like, what's happening? Because he isn't dancing. He's just standing in a crowd of people. Mm-hmm. And then the guy is on stage. I think he probably put the blonde-haired guy on stage because it seemed like it was a club where everything was fine and going great. And then Tim Carey came in and said, "Can we get this guy on stage with a guitar? And then can you guys kind of claw at him and act like he's the Beatles or whatever? And then I'm just going to stand over here." And that's what they shot. And I'm not sure what that scene is about.
Well, I'm going to posit a possibility here.
Okay.
It sounds like Frank Zappa really hates Elvis, or hated what Elvis represented at the very least.
Sure.
And I think I heard that in conjunction with some of the music that he did for this. I wouldn't be surprised if they were kind of just trying to take a shot at like the mania or the cult-like status of an Elvis or something like that. I don't know if it's super successful, but it does seem like we're just getting a glimpse of a crowd losing their mind for somebody.
Yeah, that could be it. Or it could also be, maybe this is where Clarence gets the idea that he needs to play guitar
Right.
when he's giving his speeches. And the idea of getting a congregation of people together and having them just lose their minds over whatever you're doing on stage.
Yeah, no, I think they go hand in hand. I also, I guess the thing that is most baffling about that scene is like, what is he even doing there in the first place?
Yeah, but, cinematically, it isn't clear, but when you describe it and think back on it, it becomes more clear as to, I think, what he was trying to do. And
you're saying there are elements of this narrative that are unclear to you, Bill?
Only a few.
Okay.
Only a few. So then suddenly there's another woman who has joined Clarence and Alonzo. She speaks in Spanish. I presume she might be Mexican-American. And Tim Carey dances and screams on his bed while his wife tickles or grabs at him, which is another interesting. You have to understand, ladies and gentlemen, these things are all happening in the sequence that I'm saying them. It's like they just start slamming a bunch of different incidents together, and we're not sure why.
Yeah. They're narratively crammed together for sure, and editorially crammed together as well. These are scenes that, and what's interesting about that, and I don't want to start picking on the editing too soon, but what is confusing to me or confounding to me is the film shows evidence of relatively modern editing techniques, dissolves, wipes, things like that, cuts, fades to black. I'm suggesting that they had in their disposal access to relatively, they feel like primitive tools for us now. But I guess what I would say is right off the bat, this seems to be a film that's simply not interested in giving you a sense of how things line up with each other temporally.
Right.
Because it seems like his plan is hatched in the blink of an eye, and then he's in a scene where he's kind of recruiting followers in the blink of an eye.
Yeah.
And these things are cut very sharply against one another. And I, before not realizing how sincere he was, and maybe I'm correct in this assumption, assumed that a lot of this was for comedy. And I could still be correct about that, because some of the cuts are so striking and out of nowhere, and that it really does create a comedic effect. Now that I've learned since that he was deadly serious about much of the tone of this film, but there was a lot of comedy simply in the cutting, and I would like to believe that there's an attempt at humor with some of that, but we can speculate on that as we go on.
Yeah, my guess is that he and or his editor were struggling with the editing to some degree. There's one cut that strikes me that I still remember where his daughter is in the frame outside, and then it cuts to her suddenly inside, and she's almost in the exact same position. So it's kind of a striking cut, like, oh, that was interesting. But there's really I don't know that there's any purpose for it other than covering up or trying to cover the fact that they didn't have enough coverage to transfer into the indoor scene.
Right.
So,
or maybe they were even, some of their crew was so amateur that they started rolling a little bit late, because it feels like a lot of these scenes don't have what we would call, heads or tails or handle, I guess, as we would say.
Could be.
It feels like it almost feels like they're starting a scene with the very first piece of information they have, and because that's the only account that I can give for it. Otherwise, I have to assume that something may have happened in the scene that we don't understand. But otherwise, I'm hoping maybe there's an element of comedy in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. It might even be possible that he said, "Oh, isn't that cool?" Like he was trying things, being experimental with his cutting. He wants to, he doesn't have a lot of money, so anything that can get attention,
right?
So, I'm going to go through, in general in this show, we're not going to be describing whole plots to you. And that might happen every now and then, but I'm describing the plot with the hopes that once we get up to the sort of moment when the character does his thing that kind of transforms the movie, that then we can talk more about the overall story, themes, characters, etc. So suddenly Clarence is depressed on his bed with his wife. So he was just like dancing on his bed, screaming. It seems like he's a little bit high and low. I don't know what's going on there. Now he's depressed on his bed with his wife, and he says, "Why can't I be a god? Come to bed with your god." This might be exemplary of World's Greatest Sinner dialogue at its best. Why can't I be a god? Come to bed with your god. Then Clarence gives a speech where he talks about life eternal, and a bystander says, "Life isn't worth a plug nickel." Gives a speech in a suburb where he talks about the eternal man's party.
Right.
That'll become the name of the party that he creates. He wants people that he constantly calls followers, and yet he, as we later will learn, wants everybody to think of themselves as a god. He stands on bags in one actually kind of nice, apt moment of visual metaphor. He stands on bags of fertilizer, giving a speech, which I thought was fun. And then suddenly he says, "My name is God Hilliard," and behind him is a sign that reads "The Pit." So there's sometimes some clever like juxtapositions of images and what's happening on screen. But I guess it's at this time when the movie really picks up speed in terms of its plot. This guy is starting to think, or claim at least, that he is God. And he literally is going to go by God Hilliard. But he also says every man is God. And eventually we'll learn that there's a list of rules or edicts that he has for his group.
Well, the central ethos of his platform seems to be man should be free to do whatever they want.
That sounds right, yeah. And that that religion is nonsense and there is no God outside of ourselves. So number one, Alonzo is in front of a blackboard at one point pointing to it with his followers watching, and he says, number one, superhuman beings. Number two, must be positive. That's a good one. Number three, the only heaven is on earth. And then he says, to sum up, there will be no death. These all kind of sound like the rantings of some kind of cult leader. And that's exactly what God Hilliard is basically up to.
And it feels like he's discovering it on the fly. I mean, I'm pretty sure like one of the first followers, which is also like one of his first benefactors, this old woman.
Yes.
Who kind of just lets him into her home and is very forthcoming with her money. I mean, it's not very free to distribute that however she pleases.
We watch him swindle basically this older woman, and the thing is that I guess he's sincere in his swindling, but I mean you can see his eyes shift as she's saying, I would like to give you money, and he says, "Oh no, I couldn't take that," and then you see his eyes shift, waiting for her to come back, and she does. "Oh no, I want to donate money. Just don't tell my children."
Yeah. Well, and again, at this point, I wasn't quite sure what I was in for. I wanted to go into this thing cold, so I didn't do any research before I watched it.
No, that's great.
And, I was still firmly on board with this is potentially a straight-laced comedy at this point, particularly in that scene because he winds up with a little kiss for said benefactor. He embraces her with a little smooch. Actually, not even little.
He kind of makes out with the older, old. I don't want to say. Should I say old? Elderly lady.
Yeah, she's an elderly lady.
He makes out with an elderly lady who's giving him money for his cause.
And I guess that I've since read that people would describe there being some kind of a sexual element to his cult, and if that's true, and I know that I can see that it is. I wouldn't say that that's a prominent feature of the cult.
No, I mean, I don't think it's a sex cult per se.
Right.
But it is a cult in which I think primarily likes to partake in the flesh of the young ladies.
Right. But he's not like that Bikram yoga asshole. It's not clear that he just did this to to get some tail. He believes in the ramblings that he's.
I think he does believe in them. Yeah. I mean, and if anything, I wouldn't believe that he was going after sex so much as he's going after power. Right. But I actually agree with you. I think he does believe in it because there will be a scene later that really points to that. And so there's also a great meeting. I don't know if you remember this. There's a great moment where they have a meeting among the top Eternal Man's party, and they're all discussing. They say, we have to have a group that we hate. Who can we hate?
It's a great follow-up line. He says, let's try doing it differently. Let's not hate anybody.
Yeah. That's his resolution.
Which was actually like one of the better lines in the film for me.
It's like progressive, cult work. Good job.
But he delivers it so naturally that it feels like there's a kind of a comedic irony in there.
Right. So he's, pushing along these ideas, essentially, to quote him, he says, I'm going to prove that the average person is a superhuman being and that there's only one God, and that's man. So he continues to push this platform over and over, scene after scene. You hear basically the same sorts of ideas.
But and this is something I kind of want to point out about the way that this movie moves. His cult and his following comes together, as I alluded to earlier, very quickly. And, it goes from kind of a man on the street. It feels like it's aping face in the crowd a little bit.
Yeah, it does.
And I don't know if it meant to do that, but I will say that he goes from man on the street to beloved cult leader in a very, very short span of time.
It's, again, we go back to, does he believe in what he's doing or not, which is perhaps one of the more central, interesting ideas of the movie that the movie is exploring. Does this guy actually believe what he's doing? Because he says that every man is God. And yet, early on, one of his lieutenants says, we should have a resolution that no one man should have so much power that he can become a dictator. And Hilliard makes some bumbling noises and says nothing. Cut to the next scene. That's one of the best moments, I think, for me in the whole movie, because it says everything.
Yeah, well, and it's also, you're juxtaposing that with these images of his followers with armbands that have the letter F on them, in making a very clear allusion. Nobody's missing the reference there.
Right. Actually, Timothy Carey was in the military. He didn't have a good time, but he was in the Marines. But yeah, so Hilliard continues giving speeches. He starts sleeping with women who are not his wife, and continues to somehow, it seems like he's gaining traction in the general public and more power and attention. There's one point at which he gives a speech at like a music concert hall or something. Right. And then there's this giant riot outside where the cops are like, go home. And they're like, don't tell us what to do. I'm a god or whatever, just like funny lines like that.
Well, and we should point out that it is at this point in his career that he's at his most Elvis.
Yes. He's got the floppy hair.
Yeah. He's got a backing band and he's trying to brandish some guitar skills.
And some dancing skills.
Yeah. How successful would you say he is at either of those?
Yikes. It's, we want to be kind here. He shakes his body a lot. He looks like he's having convulsions. And when he plays the guitar, he has one kind of just like machine gun strum that he does where he's barely or not at all touching any strings.
Pretty sure there's no chords going on.
There's the other arm isn't going up and down the neck, so you're pretty sure he's not actually playing anything. But it's a lot of fun to watch.
Certainly, as my wife described it, it's a combination of jiggling and convulsing.
Yeah.
And that's he's wearing a very striking like satin suit.
Yeah.
And it amplifies the whole experience.
But what's kind of really smart about it is he is combining this idea of rock star and politician.
Sure.
And, so he's kind of marrying all of these ideas together.
Which is kind of where the face in the crowd stuff also gets mixed into it, or where you can kind of see a little bit of that in the... I think that he wants to marry pop culture with demagoguery, essentially.
Yeah. And it's not like we haven't seen that ourselves.
Certainly.
Like I still remember when I was a kid and Bill Clinton went on Arsenio or whatever and played the saxophone. It was like, whoa, people lost their minds. And obviously in the case of Clinton, it's weird because there was this sexual stuff happening at the same time. And this is, years and years before that. So, yeah, Hilliard continues on his ranting, megalomaniacal ascension. Yeah. And he also has like a snake that he sometimes brandishes.
Or that is sometimes foisted upon him.
Or is foisted upon him, which will come back later in a really interesting, bizarre ending.
Yeah.
And sometimes we hear the voice of this Freeze actor who seems to more and more clearly be revealing himself to be not God. Who is that?
Damien himself?
The fallen angel?
Yeah.
Perhaps Lucifer? Yeah, it seems like this person is the devil. Sometimes it's a little on the nose. He's saying things like, yeah, you're doing what I want. Oh, yeah, the snake, yeah. But it's fun. And for some reason, that starts as a voiceover, but then eventually that character joins the campaign. So literally the actor joins them in the Eternal Man's party.
And I guess people are suggesting that maybe he is like the devil himself, or I've heard also the devil's emissary.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And essentially at a certain point, the way that Hilliard speaks is this kind of vague, I want to say things that you want to hear, like you're going to live forever. And if you're weak, then you're going to be strong. And if you're poor, then you're going to be rich. And and just whatever your problem is, I'm going to solve it. Like it's absolute garbage, culty stuff.
You think of those like a tent church revival or whatever, you think of these like faith healers and things like that. And it evokes some of that stuff, but it's not quite as drastic as that, because it does feel like he's not just creating a religion, but a political platform.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the film is obviously narratively very messy in that regard, because it doesn't seem clear to me what it's trying to say about either one. I think that Timothy Carey probably has very specific ideas, but I think that he wanted to make a lot of broad statements about religion and politics and society in general, but it's clear that he's fed up with the whole thing.
Yeah, I think it doesn't matter so much like what the character is saying, other than that he is trying to be a demagogue, right? Like he wants people to believe in him. He wants people to give him power. He wants them to think that he's going to solve all their problems, and then he's going to get what he wants.
It seems very clear that he is fed up with how easily people are indoctrinated by some of these ideas that are ancient and some of them that are kind of brand new. But
yeah, one of the things that I heard his son say about the movie was, my father was tired of hearing Hollywood say that they were going to make controversial films. They're going to make a controversial film. This film's controversial. You're going to love it when you see it, trailer out. It's controversial. And then he'd go see it and he would think this is not controversial. This is nonsense or whatever.
They invited a black man to dinner?
Right. Right. And so he said, I'm going to make a controversial film. And, in a way, this is extremely controversial because he's poking fun at all of these people that are quote unquote leaders in our different fields and in our lives, telling us that they have the answers when they clearly don't. And that the only thing that they really have is a lust for power, essentially.
Yeah, it's very clear that he's calling bullshit on a lot of organized systems that people have invested a lot into.
Absolutely. There's a number of, while there's some clunky dialogue, there's some wonderful dialogue. There's a great moment when the devil character says, "You must understand, God." He's talking to Hilliard. "You must understand, God. You must convince the people you're not an atheist. Otherwise, all is lost."
That's right.
Just little moments like that are just pure Tim Carey ridiculousness that is kind of fun. It's admirable that he got away with this in 1962.
Yeah, when I do think he is cleverly trying to blend the idea of a demagogue and a pop culture figure, as you were saying. And they have a lot of really fun and clever ways that they go about that. And one of my particular favorites is the embroidery on his jacket, on the sleeves of his jacket to say God. And
yeah.
There's a very Ray Dennis Steckler move where, you hear him. So there's all this stock footage because, they had to use stock footage, of course. And,
right.
They have like stock footage of the Republican and or Democratic convention and things like that. And,
yes.
Stock footage of these big gatherings and speeches. Yeah. And then they'll cut back to, Tim or God Hilliard against like a black background, and you'll just see his hands.
Yes.
He's just kind of scatting with his hands in front of the camera.
He's giving speeches. Yeah.
Yeah. And it also, another Stecklerism, or maybe this is just a limitation of not having the right tools, but it's very clear that they could not pull focus.
Yeah.
And, to say nothing of the shots that are simply just out of focus, which there are many, but they're, because this film is boldly, I would say, not shooting everything wide, the characters will move in and out of focal range a lot. And, Carey's doing a lot of gesticulating and moving back and forth and writhing and moving, a lot of very drastic movement. And he will literally move out of focal depth
Yeah.
in and out. And I want to say, like, hey, look at you doing an art. I don't believe it, but I kind of like the effect anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. And exactly. He's going for it. And, they used the footage that they had. And sometimes they're shooting at night, and it's 1960 or whenever they shot this.
Right.
And so, the film wasn't fast enough a lot of the times for shooting at night. That's why they shot so much day for night at the time.
A lot of big grain.
Yeah. And so, I mean, focus is really hard when you don't have film that's fast enough.
Right.
Who knows if your lens is all the way wide open, and obviously they didn't have a lot of lights. I think they might have even have shot that riot scene. The actual riot that happens, I think might have been shot for the film.
Right.
I'm not sure how they afforded that. I think I might have read that they actually had extras and that things got out of hand and there were problems.
Sure.
Because it's pretty amazing if you watch that sequence. They're like smashing street lights and they're turning over, chopping up benches and turning over a car. And it was just like, whoa, this is nuts.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking to myself as I was watching that sequence, it's like an extra could very easily get hurt in this situation.
Oh, yeah.
But, I'm all for it.
I mean, do you think he had insurance?
Maybe he got to cash in and that's how the movie got finished. I don't know.
There are various scenes of his wife trying to talk to him or meet up with him, or him turning away his wife through one of his underlings.
Right. But all at the same time, he's also having these encounters with younger women.
Yes.
Who appear to be seeking him out. It doesn't seem like he's soliciting any of this, but I could be wrong about that.
No, I mean, oftentimes they're like, oh, I want to help you. I came just to see you. I have so much to tell you. Da da da. And it seems like at first he is almost being responsible. Like, you're too young. You should go back to your mother. Da da da. And then eventually he's just sleeping with all of them.
Right. Which is some of my favorite inadvertent comedic cuts. Well, I'm hoping they're not inadvertent though. I really am hoping they're not. But there will be these moments where he's speaking with like this very serious gravity, and then a jump cut to like a woman, just right up in his face and kind of seducing him, and
right.
or he'll give like a big rallying speech, and then it'll cut to this very awkward moment with his retinue of followers. I guess they're calling them followers. And some of that stuff, if you told me it was by design, I'd say this is absolutely brilliant. And again, I don't know if I'd believe it, but I did get some very genuine laughs out of this thing. And whether they were intentional or not, I appreciate the film for it.
I think that they, a lot of those kinds of cuts were intentional. Obviously, a lot of the rhythms of the editing in certain scenes are off. Or, there's just awkward moments where the sound completely cuts out, where it's clear that they didn't even have any ambient track in there or anything.
Like there's a cut that I really love. It's like he's delivering this very big speech. I think it's that same moment I was talking about, him just gesticulating his hands in front of a black background. And, it goes from this big rally that he's at, and then suddenly it's a smash cut to a woman in a coffin. And I believe it's his benefactor.
Mother.
Oh, it's his mother. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's his mother.
That's what I missed out on. And he's just, weeping openly for her. And just how stark that cut was a bit of brilliance, even if it's not intentional.
No, you're probably right. Some of those are unintentional, probably in terms of mood shift, tone, etc.
Right.
I think he didn't quite have that down yet, but
I'd like to believe that some part of him did in that.
Maybe it did. Maybe he
I
did.
don't know.
Maybe he was like, and then I'm going to smash cut to my mother's death.
Yeah.
It's possible. He pushes his daughter to the ground during some of the arguments he's having with his wife.
Well, yeah. Oh, so now let me ask you, Bill, this is where things get murky for me, because at a certain point, it seems like he's starting to have a lapse of faith for his own system.
Yes.
Or he's,
this is a really interesting part of the movie.
I agree. And it starts around the time that his wife starts to visit him, but it seems like the moment with the daughter solidifies it. But can you like make more heads or tails of that? When do you feel like that conflict really begins?
I think you're right. I think it's when his wife basically leaves him. When he throws his daughter to the ground, he yells after his wife and child, and then he cries. He cries right after that.
Yes.
So he has pushed away the normal life. He has pushed away the good things that he had, the love that he had. And now he's having moments of self-doubt, all of a sudden. And he says to God, I don't believe. If you're up there, show me something that makes me believe. God Almighty, I defy you. And a lot of this is out of focus, by the way, which is really kind of funny. But it's a great scene. He says, I defy you to show me if you're a God. If you're better than I am, if you're more than I am, show me. Let me see what I mean to you. Show me if you're really a god. Then he says he'll give up everything if there's something stronger than man. This seemingly comes out of nowhere in a way, but I guess it is precipitated by his wife leaving.
Well, and we should be clear that he's not just in the habit of smacking his kids around that we know of, but
right.
She tries to tempt him with like a Bible verse or just tries to entreat for him to come to church, or is that what
I don't even remember exactly what she's saying, but it's just, I think the impression, at least maybe it was that, the impression...
I feel like there was like a come to church daddy.
It might have been. It might have been. Yeah. Yes. I mean, there was definitely a point where he says, you see what you're teaching our children?
Right.
Religion, you're teaching them to be just like you.
And he says that Jesus Christ is man's greatest lie, or the greatest liar of all mankind, or
yes.
a clunky line that gets the point across nonetheless.
Right.
I don't remember exactly.
He does say something like that. Yeah. So, I mean, maybe part of it's the, being upset with religion, but also, I mean, the way that I like to look at it is that he has pushed his family away in a way that he's severed ties to the things that really mean something in his life. Right. All this other stuff means nothing. He's having a crisis of consciousness. He's having a nervous breakdown in a way because he's feeling the truth.
Which, by the way, he's having this breakdown, and again, probably not intentional, but he's having this breakdown, and it's a scene that goes on for a while. It's maybe like 5 minutes with the wife and the daughter.
Yeah.
And then like the camera kind of pans around, and we see that like his whole retinue is just standing there watching the whole thing. And
did I miss that? You mean they were just standing in the same room?
Either that, or it's just another bit of editing that was like kind of too hard up against the previous scene. But it didn't seem like they shifted locations, so it just gave me the impression that these guys were just kind of standing around going, ugh,
just uncomfortable,
which I love.
That's great. And then, so he has this whole thing where he wants to talk to God, and he's saying, look, if you're there, show me, and I'll stop all this nonsense, whatever. Because his whole platform, his whole belief system is built on the idea that there is no God, that every man is God. Okay. Then we come to the scene at the church, and Gustav Holst's Mars the Bringer of War plays. Did you hear that?
I was going to ask you about that piece of music because I recognized it, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was, and I know that we've seen it. We've heard it in many other films.
I mean, films, trailers. I mean, imitated by James Horner,
right?
Whose own music was used in trailers endlessly, especially the stuff from Aliens.
And that piece of music, along with the shot of, so he's kind of hulkingly approaching the church from the outside.
Yeah, he's sort of standing around looking like he's like lost, but he's outside the church. He's clearly there, and then he's in the church all of a sudden.
But you see him approaching the church from the inside of the church.
Okay.
And you see him in the door frame.
He sits down. He sits down in one of the pews, yeah.
But before he gets in there, you hear this music and you see that shot, and it's just definitely sets this whole thing up as like a showdown of sorts.
Yeah.
Which
it's a little awkward.
It is awkward, but the point definitely gets across.
I think maybe I was being a little thick. I just didn't get it at first, and then he was going for the Eucharist, and I was like, okay. So Mars, the Bringer of War plays, and Hilliard goes inside. He waits for the service to end, and then he goes up to where they keep the Eucharist for those non-Catholics or Christians. The Eucharist is the little wafer of bread,
wafer, right?
Yeah, that represents the body of Christ. And so I'm guessing that Tim Carey was raised Catholic or Christian. And he takes it home. It's like a heist. He secretly like puts it in this napkin or something, and then he looks around and takes it with him. And he takes it home, and actually you see a close-up of him. I should mention this. He has the sunglasses on with the Eucharist, and he's holding it in front of him. That's the image at the very beginning of the movie that's in red.
Right.
So I don't know why he chose that, but I guess it does sum up things. It's him questioning all systems, including God.
Right.
So he takes the Eucharist home. He gets a pin, literally a PIN pin.
That's right.
And sticks it into the Eucharist. And he's waiting for it to bleed, because it's the body of Christ. And he does it repeatedly. And then, tries again. And nothing happens. And he starts to laugh. Yeah. And he starts to crumble it in his fingers. And he says, it's nothing but bread.
But the Lord has other designs for old God Hilliard.
Yeah, which is this is the surprising part. after this whole movie, so he's been feeling the grave doubts, and he's going to give up everything if the Eucharist bleeds, showing him there is something greater than man. But since it doesn't bleed, he's convinced there is no God. So he's
for a while,
for like 5 minutes.
Right, yeah.
He sees that he isn't doing anything wrong, and he says, "Mother, your prayers are nothing but a piece of bread. Jesus Christ, what a joke!" And he laughs for a long time, and I guess he presumes that he can continue with his megalomania with impunity at this point. And when he's leaving the room, there's actually, I don't know why this strikes me as clever, maybe because there are almost no clever shots in the whole movie, but he leaves the room and then the camera pans back to the other side of the bed where he laid the Eucharist down, which I thought was fun.
Actually, before we keep going with that, I do feel like I have been a bit harsh on a lot of the filmmaking aspects of this film, but I do want to highlight, while we're talking about cinematography, there, you already alluded to some of it, the standing on the fertilizer and things like that. There is an interesting juxtaposition of images here and there. There are a few moments where he's, having these interactions with women, and he's got this series of statues in his office or his headquarters or whatever we're calling this space that he's operating out of. And there's all of these really interesting shots of him kind of squeezed between these shallow depth of field statues that are flanking him in really interesting ways. And they're always kind of like these amorphous shapes, but they're kind of curvy or whatever. So you can read, that being a sort of them tipping their hat thematically about like the sexual encounters he's about to have. But I did get the sense that there was more thought put into that stuff than we may initially think on the surface.
Yeah, I think there is at least some ideas for visual puns, metaphors, things like that occasionally. And in his defense, back then it took money to have a dolly track and a dolly. And he's probably shooting almost everything on sticks and maybe sometimes hand holding.
Definitely.
So this is a guy doing what he can with what he's got. So we're back to, the panning to the Eucharist. Okay, so then things get really weird. This is...
How so?
After all of this bizarreness, things get really weird. There's a strange sequence where Hilliard chases like this line in the ground. It's almost like Children of the Corn, when the devil's going through the stalks, It's like but it's smaller. It looks like a gopher made a little trench or something.
Or like one of the Keebler elves left a trail of chocolate behind.
Yeah. What kind of chocolate? So where that idea comes from, or if it's referencing something biblical, I don't know. Call in with your thoughts. During this, as he's following this line in the ground, he leaves his house. He follows the line.
Right.
At one point, there's a freeze frame of him, and then you see a superimposition of the snake on him. Right. Obviously, that's the devil. And then you also see literally the superimposition of the devil behind him, like laughing or smiling. So then he continues following this line.
And it seems like the trail of chocolate seems to lead him back into his house.
Goes right back to his house. It goes right back to the bedroom where we just were.
Yeah.
And he follows it upstairs and into the bedroom and opens the door.
What happens?
What happens?
A world of color is unveiled upon us. And I suppose it's supposed to represent that he's smitten?
Yeah, I think it's the face of God or something. Like he is all of a sudden taken by the light of God, and it just knocks him out. And we go straight to the credits, but it's definitely like some kind of reckoning, like he is being struck by God.
Yeah, I certainly read that as...
Not killed, I don't mean, but I mean he's...
No, it seemed like a very Raiders of the Lost Ark moment.
Actually, Lucas, by the way, funded the restoration of this.
Oh, I love it. You got to love it.
Do we want to talk about that?
Please do, because I don't actually know.
No. So Lucas, so there's this thing called the Hobson Lucas Family Foundation, a.k.a. the George Lucas Family Foundation. So Melody Hobson is Lucas's wife. So they have all these different charities because they have $1 gazillion.
Okay.
But I think it's wonderful that they provided the funding for the restoration of this film. And part of it's the Academy Film Archive also, which is also kind of mind-blowing, because why does the Academy care about this crazy independent film made by a troubled character actor, or I shouldn't say troubled, a character actor who sometimes presented trouble on sets.
Well, yeah. And look, the cynical part of me wants to say, oh, it's because everybody wants to be seen as a preserver of important work, and they don't really actually care. They just want to be seen that way. But whatever, the ends don't have to justify the means.
Totally. Whether good on them for preserving something that wasn't made within the studio system. That's what I'm thinking. And the Film Foundation, I'm not sure who runs that, but the funding for that is provided by Hobson Lucas Family Foundation. And I quote, I wrote this down because I thought it was fun. The Hobson Lucas Family Foundation, also known as the George Lucas Family Foundation, is the private grant-making foundation of Ariel Investments president Melody Hobson and her husband, film writer and director George Lucas, according to influencewatch.org.
They lead with writer, huh? Well, no, so yeah, I take your point. It does seem like a strange project for them to want to try to restore, but...
Well, I get Lucas doing it. Because Lucas has always been a bit of a rebel, and I love George Lucas, yes. Yeah. But the fact that the Academy did something was super cool.
Well, and I do think that, look, I've heard a lot of people talk about this movie. A lot of people seem to be dismissing it as a curio at best, as just this kind of a piece of novelty. And I guess before we kind of sign off on our inaugural here, I guess I would put to you, do you view it as anything more than just an interesting artifact from the 60s by and by the way, you see that this man is talented, but it also sounds like he's apparently very unhinged as well. It seems like Tim Carey really needs to be reined in. And when he is reined in, he's capable of brilliance. Do you feel like this is a movie that benefits from not being reined in and just existing on the id of Tim Carey? And either way, do you view it as more than just a curio or a simple novelty?
Yeah, I think absolutely it exists. It benefits from being from the id of Tim Carey. Obviously the studio wouldn't have made this film, even though it made the Kazan film. I don't know that it would have gone this far in the ways that this one did. Right. I'm guessing the other one doesn't.
No, not nearly as far.
And so, there's that. This is a really bold film for the time. It's a bold film for today. I think if you showed this in some parts of America, there would be some pretty upset people. And so I don't think it's just a curio. I don't mind calling it a curio, but I wouldn't say it's just a curio. I would say it's a biting satire of, these systems of demagoguery that we blindly follow and listen to and learn from and don't question. And Carey, I think, is telling us to question them all. And I agree. But then at the same time, he seems to be saying, but there is a power greater than us.
Yeah, it's muddled in its messaging, but maybe he's not pointing to any specific... Well, actually, he does invoke the actual devil, so... It does seem like he's approaching this from a Christian framework.
Absolutely.
I wanted to kind of give him some credit and say, well, maybe he's trying to say that there's something greater than all of us and we don't know what it is and we should all be humble just because we don't have the answers or something like that. But it seems like he's leaning pretty heavily on Christianity. So it does get confusing there.
Well, there's that, but also what you're saying, that doesn't discount that. Some people might take their version of God to be what you're saying, that there's that good within all of us and we should be humble before our own greatness. And obviously he's using the power that he gains in the film for things that are frivolous. And maybe that's also what he's commenting on.
Yeah.
The end credits play in cards over black with some shots of like cracked Eucharist with holes in it and a needle beside it. And then between some credit blocks, we see images. Did you see those?
Yeah, I love this. So they don't actually describe the department that they're crediting. They just give you a little icon, a little visual, or an animation in lots of cases, yeah.
Yeah. So there's there's like a music baton. Yeah. There's scissors cutting a strip of film. Yeah. There's a coiled snake at one point. I'm not sure what that one was.
I took that to be Animal Wrangler.
Oh, yeah, of course.
I don't know. Yeah. I could be totally wrong.
Yeah, it could be. It looks like one is a call sheet, I guess, like the ADs.
Oh, there you go.
It looks like a call sheet.
I like that.
A dollar sign, I guess that's the producer or accounting.
I think we should normalize this in other films going forward.
It's pretty great. Tim Carey's arms then hold Tim Carey's credits. You see his arms kind of, not him, but just his arms stick up. And they include him as starring, written, produced, and directed by Timothy Carey. And the ending quote says, "Judge not that you be not judged." Matthew 7:1. And then the words, "the beginning," appear over black. They appear and then it fades to black. And what I'm wondering is, does this mean he was planning on making more films? What does this mean?
You're not privy to the World's Greatest Sinner franchise? You don't remember that? You don't remember that themed tie-in they did with Happy Meals?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
World's Greatest Sinner in Space.
Yeah,
Yes, World's Greatest Sinner X.
I
Yes.
can't tell you how, I've been trying to get rid of my collectible cups for years. And
Oh, you got the ones from Burger King?
I did.
Oh, I want one of those so bad. Yeah, I'll buy them from you.
Okay.
Totally.
Okay, good.
All right.
No, I don't know what they had in mind there. I do think that it's pretty clear that Tim Carey wanted this to propel him somewhere that it didn't, unfortunately, because I think he's got an interesting mind, and
100%.
I don't think it's entirely successful, but I'm glad it exists, and thanks for exposing me to it.
Absolutely. And, I encourage more people to look into the world of Timothy Carey, again, mostly as a character actor. He's just a real great presence on screen. If you look up his images on Google, you'll find just the fact his face, just that alone is wonderful, and different and unique. He also worked on a film that you might have heard of called Tweet's Ladies of Pasadena. I think he might not have gotten through that one. And then there are some other things on his IMDb, which I don't know.
So I know that he was I know that the Monkees have a Bob Raffleson film where
Head.
they did Head. And
Written by Jack Nicholson, by the way.
Oh, I did not realize.
Yeah.
I think I've only seen bits and pieces
And
of it.
Frank Zappa's in it.
That makes sense.
So that connects Tim Carey and Frank Zappa again.
And he's definitely in a few of those vignettes. Tim Carey is.
Tim Carey's in it. He plays Lord High and Low or something like that. His name is something like that. High and Low, Lord High and Low.
Yeah, he's out there. And at the very least, if you just need it seems to be everybody's jumping off point for him, but Paths of Glory, The Killing, amazing scenes in both of those films.
Yeah.
At the very least, just check those scenes out. They're really quite gripping.
Right on. Thanks, Colin.
Well, yeah, so where can people find us?
This, our first episode, is sound engineered, edited, and mixed by Colin Dixon. It was produced by William Boudel and Colin Dixon, recorded at DC Creative, that's dccreative.tv in beautiful Burbank, California. If you'd like to contact us with comments, suggestions, or high praise, email us at cosmicmotionshow@gmail.com or send us a voice message at speakpipe.com/Cosmic Motion. You can find us on the socials at Cosmic Motion or Cosmic Motion Show. Emails, messages, audio, or other media you send us may be featured on our program. Thanks for joining us on this episode. Colin.
I'm off to find the world's greatest dinner.
We look forward to sharing more thoughts with you on the next one. Until then, keep learning, growing, and creating.